Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Dreary Midnight Podcast. My name is Lisa, my pronouns are she, they, and tonight we are delving into scary stories from people I actually know, Part 2. Start with Marty's story. Marty, in addition to being a friend and colleague, is a musician in the DC area. His band is Troubled Times Apart, and they recently released a self-titled EP, which is available on Spotify and Apple Music and all of the other streaming sites. So if you want to go check that out, you definitely should do so. It's great. With all that said, let's dive into Marty's story first.
My name is Marty, and this is a story about a paranormal experience I had in St. Louis, Missouri. It was about 15 years ago, and I was traveling to Virginia for the summer with my family. My mom has a strong fear of flying, so we used to take long road trips everywhere we went for vacation. The drive from Colorado to Virginia is about 3 days, which gave us plenty of time to sightsee and to see as much of the United States as possible. My family also loves ghost stories and all things paranormal. My mom would watch shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and plan out our road trips to stay in the haunted hotels or bed and breakfasts they went to. I've stayed in a lot of haunted places in my life, and as a child I was on more ghost tours than I'm sure any normal child has ever been on. This summer was no different than any of the other ones. Now, as a disclaimer, I don't 100% believe in ghosts, as I've never seen anything with my eyes to give me definite proof, but this place in St. Louis did sway my beliefs a little bit. Our haunted destination for the night was a bed and breakfast called the Lemp Mansion in Old Town St. Louis. I remember seeing the rows of Victorian houses lining the cracked streets and the dark green leaves from the old oak trees. Across the highway, the huge Budweiser brewery was bellowing steam into the air. And St. Louis is known for a lot of things, but the two big ones are the Gateway Arch leading to the west and beer. Lager specifically. European immigrants found limestone caves under the city that provided the perfect temperature, humidity, and cover to brew a beautiful golden lager. And in the 1800s, Lemp beer was the most popular lager in the United States. The brewery was owned by William J. Lemp, and the Lemp family made a lot of money throughout their business days, but unfortunately they also saw a lot of horror in their lives. After the death of William's son, most of his close relatives and friends, he and 3 other family members took their own lives in the house. After it became a boarding house in the 1950s, once the brewery had closed, it fell into disrepair, and then it was eventually bought by its current owners and rebuilt into the bed and breakfast it is today. Now, with a history like that, my mom booked us a night in that bed and breakfast as fast as she could. We parked the car and went up to the door, surrounded by stained glass and white wooden columns. We rang the doorbell and were greeted by the owner. He signed us in, collected his payment, and abruptly left. And then we were alone in the house for the whole night. After going to dinner and taking a drive to see the historic buildings in the Old Town area, including the abandoned Lemp Brewery only a few blocks away, we returned to our bed and breakfast for the night. We settled into our room, watched some shows on my mom's portable DVD player, and after a few hours, my sister had gone to bed. My mom asked if I wanted to go explore. I, of course, said yes, and we went on our adventure. We went from room to room in the dark, trying to talk to the ghosts and ask them to turn on a light or make a sound or give us some sign that they were there with us. We made our way through the first floor with no signs of anything there, and then went up to the second floor and into the first room on the right. This room was originally a child's bedroom and had an old upright piano up against the wall by the door. We walked around the room with our flashlights, with the same routine as downstairs, but now we had something in the room that made noise for us. We asked, very politely, that if there was anyone in the room with us, could you push down a key on the piano? We stood in shaky silence, waiting for a response, but nothing. We asked 2 or 3 more times, but were met with the same silence. So we carried on and walked out of the room. But right as we turned the corner, we heard it. 5 or 6 high register notes gently pressed down on the piano, like someone laying their hand across a few keys. We froze, we looked at each other, and then calmly walked back to our room. We were all done exploring for the night. It wasn't a violent thing, it wasn't a slam against the keys, and nothing else happened to us for the rest of the night, but it was like something, or someone just there confirming that they were there with us. And in the morning, we packed our bags and got back into our car and headed on to the next town. And as I said before, I don't 100% believe in ghosts, but that's about as close as I could get.
Oh my god, that was amazing. That was so cool. Oh my god. So, again, Marty's band is called Trouble Times Apart. They just released their first EP. I will leave all of their links in the episode description. You should go check them out. Next up is a story from my friend and colleague, Meredith. Meredith is also a tour guide. She's also a DC-based actor, and I will leave her links in the description as well. So with that said, let's get into Meredith's story.
So on the ghost tours we give, there's a famous cemetery at a church called the Presbyterian Meeting House. A lot of really cool history behind that place. But there is a very interesting story that we tell, then became the basis for something that happened to me. So this church, George Washington's funeral was held there. It's really old. And they were building another church just next door about 100 years after that church was already built. This was like they were building a new church in the 1800s. The other church was built in the 1700s. And while they were digging to build the new church, they came across this big old artillery box. And inside of it were these human remains with bits of a Revolutionary War officer's uniform attached. And there was nothing else to identify who this person was. So the community decided to honor his service and bury him in the churchyard of the historic church that was already standing. And so it's the tomb of the unknown Revolutionary War soldier, kind of like a companion grave to the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington. And because he's one of the more famous people buried in that cemetery, the legend is that he likes to make a lot of appearances. And so people would often say, the legend goes that they would see a shadow of a gentleman in a tri-cornered hat appearing in this window in the building located just behind the grave, or they would see a shadow of him standing in the back against the wall of the churchyard. And, I would tell the story. I didn't really pay it any mind. I didn't really see any validity to it. It was a fun story. The history was interesting, but I never really thought anything would come of it. One night I had a group that left the cemetery, and I was the last one out, as I often am. I felt kind of like someone was watching me. There was no one there. And I look out of the corner of my eye, and I see very clearly what looks like a shadow of a person in a tri-cornered hat, almost like how a curl of smoke would look being left behind when someone smokes a cigarette or when someone breathes and it's cold outside. Just appearing in that window, that circular window above where the grave is. No sooner did I sort of register what I had seen than I looked back and it was gone. That really shook me up, obviously, and I left the cemetery that night, and I just tried to explain it away, but I couldn't. In the years since, it's happened to me a handful of other times, that very same thing of just out of the corner of my eyes, I'm leaving. I feel like there's something else there. I look and I just see that shadow in the window. I just sort of acknowledge it, pay my respects at the grave, and then leave. But what's very interesting is I'm not the only person who does these tours who's had this sort of thing happen. So I told my coworker, like, this happened to me. And I said, have you ever had anything happen? She said, I'll do you one better. And she shows me this picture. And in the picture, it's like a school group posed in the cemetery for like a class photo after their tour with her as the tour guide in her costume. She had told me they did a burst of photos where you hold down the shutter button on the camera on your phone and then it just takes a bunch of photos in a row. It's essentially the same photo multiple times. So it's the same shot just being captured over and over. No one's moved, everyone's completely still. It's the same shot just being repeated. In only one of those shots in the photo burst she shows me, clear as day in the back row, gentleman in the tri-cornered hat. That same shadow that I saw, even clearer than I saw it in the window. And that's my story.
Well, that was amazing. Meredith referred to a colleague's photo, and I will leave a link to that in the blog post that goes along with this episode. But thank you to Marty and Meredith for contributing their stories. I will leave their links in the show notes and in the blog post as well. Well, thank you for joining me on this dreary midnight. If you would like to submit a story of your own, send it in via email. Just record a voice note and email it in, drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/drearymidnight. If you want to follow on socials, we're on Instagram @drearymidnightpod. All of the music is licensed through Epidemic Sound. I'll leave a link to that in the description, as well as the names of all the songs that were used today. Until next time, be cautious in graveyards. Don't ask for things you're not ready for, and safe travels home on this dreary midnight. Good night.